All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Hydroplate Theory celebration, week of celebration. We're so blessed to have Mike Snavely. He's been giving creation tours in the Southwest America, and that's a 7-day trip. He'll bring you on safaris out in Africa, which is a 16-day trip. And he's also got a homeschool curriculum, and he's got a passion for people to connect to the world that we see with God's word. And let's see, he runs a Mission Imperative. You can see more of what he does at missionimperative.org. He's got some of the best creation videos regarding the flood and Grand Canyon, especially his puzzle on the plateau. So without any further ado, thank you so much for coming here, Mike Snavely. It is such a blessing to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, what a blessing it is. Yeah, we're here to celebrate Walt Brown and the hydroplate theory.
Absolutely.
And it's just, yeah, how did you find out about it?
So that was a long time ago, probably in the mid-90s. I was teaching a Sunday school class. And this is when my wife and I were still appointees to return to South Africa as missionaries. And I was asked to teach a Sunday school class on creation versus evolution topics and so forth. So I got to the flood, and the thing is that this is a 13-week course. I was told I only had 2 weeks to prepare, and I had never taught anything like this before. So it was kind of a week-by-week basis. I finally got to the flood, and I started kind of an intro thing, and somebody told me or asked me, have you ever watched the video that CBS did in the late 80s called something like The Incredible Discovery of Noah's Ark? Well, I hadn't heard of it, and he gave me a VHS tape of that. So I plugged it in and I watched the video, but then it was narrated by Darren McGavin. Remember who that is? He's an actor.
Okay.
So he's talking about this, and he talked about, well, look, the flood says it went to covered all the pre-flood mountains, and it went to a depth of 20 feet. And he says, well, how could this have happened? He says, well, for possible answers, let's go to, and then he introduced Dr. Walter Brown. And then I saw this animation that CBS had done. It was kind of more cartoon-like, but I had never seen anything like that before. I didn't know what it was. It seemed reasonable. I mean, everything seemed logical, and it seemed reasonable. So what I did is I asked then, you couldn't just put a VCR up back then. You had to get the sound guy to set up this big honking heavy machine, and had to focus the whole thing, and so then I booked the thing, and then I showed that to the Sunday school class. Well, I became fascinated with that, and somebody told me that he had written a book. So I went to the local Christian bookstore. I didn't know who the publisher was or anything. Anyway, she looked through and she actually found it. So I ordered one. It turned out it's either the 4th or 5th edition. Now you probably know what that is. It's a little soft cover thing. So,
yeah, I just know the 8th edition, and that's 300 pages. That's a big one.
This is an early one, a soft cover one. Anyway, I got it and kind of devoured it, but I had some questions coming up, and so I went at the back and I found a phone number, and I thought, well, I don't know what this is, so I thought I'd let a message there, maybe get some answers. So a man answered the phone, and I said, I'm sorry. I thought this was Sunday afternoon. I thought I would just get a message and let my phone number. Turned out it was Dr. Brown.
Really?
And he talked with me for at least half hour, 45 minutes, answered some of these basic questions, even though he didn't know me from Adam, didn't know anything. I had not read his book. I had just received it. I was reading through some things that were of interest to the next week's course. Well, anyway, I was able to talk directly with him. He answered some very important questions that I had. So I presented those to the Sunday school class the next time, and it all worked out real well. Well, that Sunday school class ended, and I never really thought much about it until the church asked me literally the next year, would I do it again? And the class had grown to over 200 people that first time.
Wow.
By this time, I had, I think, the next edition of his book. I had found out that I could go and get the next edition before the internet. I had to order it through my local bookstore. So what happened then was I read enough about it that I called Dr. Brown and said, look, we want to have a live Q&A with you. And so what we did is I had everybody for several weeks write down their hardest questions on 3x5 cards. And what they did is, and I when I collated these cards, I got rid of all the redundant ones. And then what happened was on that particular Sunday, Walt Brown literally called into our church. The tech guys patched his call through to the speakers, and then the microphone at the podium was patched through to the phone, so I could read the questions to him. He could answer on the phone, and everybody in the audience could hear it.
Wow.
And that was phenomenal that he was willing to do that. And he answered so many hard questions that people had back then. I think that was in 94, that second class, 94 or maybe early 95. That was my introduction to the hydroplate theory, directly from the guy who founded it. But I didn't know anything about it at that time. I didn't know much more than the theory just seemed to make sense. And anyway, that was my introduction to it.
Praise the Lord. What a blessing that must have been. What do you think what's the main reason that you do support hydroplate over the other model, over the other versions?
Well, there had been other models that I had seen back then. In fact, I was even using the canopy theory. I thought that seemed reasonable, but then when I began to read more into it, I realized, well, that probably wasn't really anything I wanted to promote. And it turns out later on they did abandon that. But basically, the reason why I chose to support the hydroplate theory is, number one, it seemed totally biblical. I looked up the Bible verses that were used in the theory. It was solidly biblical, which was the most important thing. The second thing is it did not require any extra miracles. Various theories require certain miracles, or let's call it rescue devices, which I know you know that term.
Oh, yeah.
Rescue devices to try to get the thing to work. This required none of that. This only made two assumptions. In fact, Walt told me in a phone call one time early on, he said, I'm basing this on two assumptions. Number one, that there were fountains of the deep, exactly like is referred to in various of the Psalms and Proverbs, and Peter talks about it, Genesis chapter 7, the fountains of the deep burst forth and so forth. So there were fountains of the deep, which of course aren't there now like they were before. He says that's the first assumption. The second assumption is that there was a lot of heat with dissolved chemicals in those deep fountains. He says, if you can grant me just those two assumptions, then I can show you, according to known laws of physics, exactly why we have the planet that we have now. And that was before he was making all these incredible predictions that you and I know about now that are coming true. You know, the stuff with comets and all that kind of stuff. So not only did it seem logical, it was certainly biblical. It seemed to square with anything that laws of physics and so forth, but it also seemed to square with any visible data that you could actually see on the planet. So, and the other thing too, it was simple enough that anyone could understand it. You lay it down logically, and then anyone could understand it. So that's kind of why I first began to have a real bent toward it.
Oh, what a blessing! Yeah, I think he's Isaac Newton.
Scientific, and all that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've heard him called Isaac Newton of our day, and I believe that. He's tied together so many unanswered questions. Yeah. And then he goes in front of your church and he takes all these questions. None of them were pre-approved, right? He didn't know what was coming, right?
They were all cold. He had no idea. I did not give him the questions earlier. And by the way, you mentioned, sort of the Isaac Newton of our day. The founder of ICR even called him the most brilliant mentor.
Wow.
One of our most brilliant scientists, of our day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So Henry Morris. And so, yeah, and he is definitely a brilliant scientist. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, we're actually trying to get some HPT guys to talk with some CPT guys. And the CPT expert, that's catastrophic plate tectonics, that expert wants a list of pre-approved questions before he comes on. So that's a little different than Walt, isn't it?
Yeah, it was definitely different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So, you mentioned the biblical support and the scientific support, and you've had a ministry for decades, for 30 years at least.
Right.
How do you use this in your ministry, and what's been the results?
Well, the first time I actually really began to use it in a ministry that I could actually really say was more personal was by the time we got to 2005, we began to make our own videos. But let me just back up a little bit. We actually started our ministry in 1995. By the time it seems like the Lord used that Sunday school class to kind of open the doors to teach these seminars. I converted that 13 weeks into like a weekend worth of seminars. So we began to go all over, and that became our ministry, is to go down to churches, camps, you name it, conventions, and speak. But even so, when I did my flood talks that I was developing, I hadn't narrowed everything down yet. There's a lot of material in a 13-week class to try to squeeze down into some real coherent things, as well as adding answers to commonly asked questions that people were asking along the way. So I kept honing the material, but every time I did the flood session. And by the way, that original VHS tape I bought from the guy at our church who had ordered it from CBS. So I would carry that with me. And every church that I would go and speak in, they had to either rent a video projector or I would have to rent one. And so we would play that little thing, and we would rent it just for that little 5-minute clip, because I felt it was so important for people to understand. And at the end of every single time I would show that little VHS clip, people would say, wow, that makes so much sense. It's so simple, and it's biblical and so forth. So I began to use it in my talks, all through to the point where I began to make my own videos starting in 2005. Well, then I knew I needed some more different animations, and that is actually when we went out to Walter Brown himself, and I kind of took the original script that he had used for CBS. We modified it, and he and I modified the script. He was kind of updating things, and then it got to the point where as he was working on these updates, I was able to storyboard them to get them ready to get some animations made. So I originally had the first animations made in 2005 with a guy in Hollywood, actually, and so I was able to make those first. And then I was able to hire some animators. And so over the years, we've done 3 different animations, updating it each time. So the last time we've done it was just several years ago, when we went out to Walt's house and actually recorded it again in his office. And so we were able to do it that way. But yeah, so how I've used it in the ministry when I speak, and specifically in our videos with animations of the hydroplate theory that he has approved and even been on the videos.
Wow. Well, praise the Lord for that. That is so exciting. And you use that for, like, you go around to the Grand Staircase, all these national monuments down by Colorado and Utah and all those places.
Right.
And,
Arizona, yeah.
Yeah. And you can explain it with the hydroplate. Is that right?
Well, so what happened is I was convinced of the veracity of the hydroplate model. So in his book, as you know, there's the unit on the hydroplate theory, but then there are like sub-chapters after that.
Yeah.
So once the theory began to make real sense to me, what I did was I began to look through these. I was reading this, and I read one on the Grand Canyon, which totally fascinated me, because on the plateau, there's all these national and state parks just to the west of the Rocky Mountains, and all across the plateau are all these national and state parks. And as you know, Grand Canyon is one of the, like, granddaddy of them. Well, when I read that subchapter on the Grand Canyon, he actually sent me a PDF version of the next version of that subchapter when I was going on a 10-week trip rafting down the Colorado River through the canyon. Everything made so much sense, even to the point where when I decided to make a video called Grand Canyon, The Puzzle on the Plateau, so many people have looked on that plateau and they say, man, how in the world did these incredible features get here? Zion National Park, one of the most beautiful parks. You get Bryce Canyon, you think you're on a theme park on Mars. And those are to the left of actually what was specifically what he was referring to. But those parks are there as a result of the plateau rising up, as a result of the mountains, sinking after the flood. So you have this plateau rising, you have all these things happening. Well, on the plateau are many features that are now these parks, and a lot of people didn't know how they got here. But if you realize what his theory is proposing is that after the flood, there were many post-flood lakes and depressions, and these happened to be 2 large lakes that went up with the plateau after the flood. and they continued to grow because of melting, snow and so forth. And eventually they breached their natural dam walls and carved out the canyon dramatically fast, and leaving in their wake all these other features that are now national parks and state parks. So to me, it's phenomenal. It's like God is showing his creative handiwork even in destruction. So you have this massive worldwide destruction, and I was convinced of the veracity of that model and all the sedimentary layers that you can see at the Grand Canyon. Then a local catastrophe, a post-flood local catastrophe, carved out the canyon and all those things, revealing the petrified forest, and the whole thing tied together so well that I wanted to make a video of that because I was fascinated. I thought, well, maybe other people might want to know that too. And that gave birth to the safari that we do called the Southwest Safari, where we take people there, show them one of these wonders of the world, Grand Canyon, one of the most visited places in the world, and show them that this didn't happen over millions of years. It happened dramatically fast. It's the world's best classroom for evidence for the global flood and for that local catastrophe that happened after the flood, with that when the waters of the flood drained out, leaving these lakes and then pushing it up, the plateau rising and so forth. It's a phenomenal area.
Oh yeah, one of these. I hope I can get on one of your safaris. They fill up fast.
They do in 2 days when I open.
Yeah, just incredible. People, they can register at missionimperative.org, I believe.
You can go click on the safari page and you can see the information.
Yeah, and you got to get there fast. And it's well worth it because you'll go to Monument Valley and look at the mesas, buttes, and spires, and you'll go to Zion and Bryce, and one of those has the Hutus and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then the canyon lands. And did you get down to Petrified Forest or no on that one?
No, Petrified Forest is a little further to the southeast from where we go. And we could do that, but it adds an extra day for only maybe a half hour, 45-minute walk.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's just kind of too far out of the way to be practical.
Oh, yeah.
But otherwise, we would, yeah.
Oh man, yeah, that's hopefully I can get on one of those. There's a videographer, he wants to do a hydroplate documentary similar to what is Genesis history. So hopefully we can get on this next one and or like next year. This one's already booked. But yeah, what a blessing that is. And so there's a lot of biblical evidence, the scientific evidence, and the strongest evidence. If you could just pick one thing that says, I think the hydroplate is right because of blank, what would that be?
The Bible, because right away you're starting off with the fountains of the deep, and then Peter talks about where the water came from. In fact, Peter says specifically where the water came from, and he talks about the earth being formed on the waters and on top of the waters and so forth. And so then you refer back to all the scriptures in the Old Testament that talk about all these subterranean waters. So it makes it clear that when God first made the planet, he made surface waters and deep waters. These waters were under lots of pressure, because if they weren't, you wouldn't have in Genesis chapter 7 saying the waters burst forth, which means to explode violently. So these waters were under tremendous pressure, and they were also supercritical, which made them explosive.
Oh yeah.
So it's just the biblical evidence alone is phenomenal. But then you have the physical evidence. Like, one of the things that totally fascinated me about the hydroplate theory, two things I'll mention quickly. One is, if it happened the way the theory states, you have North and South America, you have kind of that plate, if you will, and you have sort of Europe, Africa, Asia sliding away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge, okay? So you have it sliding away. Well, when anything slides like that, you imagine this continent sliding like this on water, and as it squeezes out the water, it's going to make huge amount of magma and lava and everything at the bottom. But as it grinds to a halt, it's going to buckle up, just like a train crashing. It's going to buckle and bend. So you're going to have these mountains buckling up, pushing up all these fresh sediments, all these fresh fossils. That's why I have all the billions of fossils on top of all the mountain ranges of the world. But the thing that fascinated me is that the mountain ranges are parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. That was another major bit of evidence to me of the veracity of this model. The other thing too had to do with the ring of fire. There's nothing else that makes sense, because the ring of fire, where 90% of the Earth's volcanic and earthquake activity happen along that ring of fire, the ring of the Pacific, which is Western South America, the whole way up the west coast of America, Alaska, down to East Asia and so forth, 90% of it's there. No other model really makes sense, because if you look at a tectonic model, what in the world is happening in the Atlantic Ocean? And the ridge in the Pacific actually hugs the west coast of the United States. But the one in the middle of the Atlantic is literally in the middle. And that is a much bigger mountain range. So what in the world is happening there when you get to the edges of the continents? The only thing that made sense is this particular model. The physical evidence that you can see and experience seems to square only with this model.
Yeah, I agree. There's so much evidence to it, and yet there's not much, it's not very widely understood or widely recognized. How do you think we could get this? What's that?
That's changing.
Yeah, it sure is. It's getting traction. That's for sure. I mean, what are some ideas that people could do to help people understand get familiar with the hydroplate?
Well, for starters, sort of do what we're hoping to have. Hopefully we're having the 9th edition soon. I think for people to get into the book, number one, and to understand the theory, to understand how reasonable it is. That's the first thing probably people could do. Second thing is maybe talk about it, just like we're doing now, incorporating it into Sunday school classes that people teach about this, because I get people requesting this stuff all the time and buying the video all the time, asking me if they can play it in their church. And I say, absolutely, you may do that. So anything that's available nowadays it's, people do blogs and they do, podcasts and all that kind of stuff. Add it to that. This stuff is absolutely fascinating. And the predictions, as you well know, some of the predictions are phenomenal, and they're coming true, which is exciting.
Yeah, it seems like whenever NASA discovers something out there, it's like, well, that validates the hydroplate theory. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's quite a blessing.
Definitely some of the things that they found.
Yeah, it's all right there. No, it's other things too. I think some of the best Christmas and birthday gifts are your videos. The horrors of the flood. We showed that, and also the Grand Canyon puzzle on the plateau. Those are some of the best flood videos out there, bar none. And if people want to go, and give them, spend money in God's kingdom. That's what I tell people to do. They're going to have birthdays, they're going to have Christmas, get these videos, support the ministries. And then another good video, good resource is Brian Nickel. If you want to see more of the scientific approach to all of this, he does a really good job with his YouTube channel, and also Real Science Radio. They've got a bunch of interviews on stuff like that.
Right.
So you've got the biblical, you've talked to a lot of people, are there any examples where people say, you know what, this makes a lot of sense and it helps them to put more faith in the Bible than what they had before they heard about it? Absolutely.
In fact, that's an interesting thing you bring up, because I'll just give you two personal examples that happened. One happened in Delaware, where I was speaking in a church, and a woman came up to me after the session and she was crying. And now I don't know what that, I usually try to avoid a woman who's coming up to me crying. So I looked for my wife, and my wife was over at the book table, and I finally just said to her, "Yes, ma'am, can I help you?" She was a young woman who told me a fascinating story. She said she's a professional biologist and in one of the disciplines, and she said that she had become a Christian about 3 or 4 years ago, and she was ineffective. She understood her sin. She understood her need for salvation. But when she looked at the Old Testament, she read about the flood, which she, quote unquote, knew was a myth. And she says, but the story of the flood was written as though it's fact, just like the New Testament talked about what Jesus did to pay for my sins. She goes, I believed this, but couldn't believe that. And she goes, so I was completely ineffective. I felt like I was just, my tires are just spinning. She said, I knew the flood was a myth. There was no way there could be a global flood. Then she came to the session, saw the hydroplate theory, saw the animations I do after I present the little video, and it just absolutely clicked with her. And she now said, okay, now I know whether it's exactly like this or not. Now I know there's a reasonable explanation to explain something that I thought was impossible. And all of that makes total biblical sense and scientific sense. That was a girl who was already saved. Here's another story that happened in Western Canada. there was a man who was using my material to lead a Bible study. Well, at least my material when he was talking about the flood. And he got to the point where he said to the class, and by the way, the class was made up of a bunch of different people, and there was an older man who was in attendance, but nobody really knew who he was. They got to know him as he was attending the Bible study. And at the end of the session where they showed the video, he put up his hand and just bluntly said, "I'm ready to accept Jesus Christ."
Praise the Lord.
And that stunned everybody. And the guy who led him to the Lord, who was leading the Bible class, he came down from Canada. I met with him in a church. He told me the story. And he said, I led him to the Lord. And he says, he passed from death unto life.
Praise the Lord.
I thought that was fascinating. So, but they asked him, they said, what struck you? Like, you've been coming to this Bible study now for like weeks. What struck you? He said, that video. Wow. That video showing the hydroplate. He said, the story was almost the same as the young woman. He said, I knew that the flood was only a myth. And so that was my holdout. That was the weak point. I knew it couldn't have happened. Now that I've seen a totally reasonable explanation that I can grip, that I can understand, that just squares with everything I can observe and common sense and the Bible and everything. He said, now I know I can totally trust the Bible. I'm ready to give my heart to the Lord. I mean, that kind of story just blows you away when you hear about it. It's amazing.
Praise the Lord! Praise the Lord! Yeah, the truth is, it's available. I mean, it's there, and I just wish that everybody who had access to make it more available would just say, "Yeah, let it go." And so, but yeah, what a blessing that is to see people go from death to life. Absolutely. Right in front of their eyes, and this is a major tool, and so hopefully some of the other creation organizations will start allowing. You can have two theories up there; you don't have to just pick one. Yeah. And so hopefully it starts to grow, and it's been a lot of fun. But you've had personal experience with Walt Brown, right?
Oh yeah. In fact, when I first met him on the phone back in the early '90s, it wasn't until. Boy, when was it? It wasn't until we began to decided to make our own animation. So I didn't meet him for the first 5 or 6 years, even though I was selling his book like mad. I was talking with him on the phone numerous times every year, asking him questions, whatever. But I never met him until years later. And one of the things that totally that made me really appreciate Walt is that he knew there were many people who were actively talking against him. And the attacks were not just about his theory. The attacks became personal, which is, fortunately, as you know, a lot of people are that way. If they can't win an argument on solid pieces of things that you can debate or talk about, you get reduced to name calling. Yeah. Which then that's kind of when I get out of things. If somebody does that, I'm not interested. But Walt knew there were many people who disagreed with him, but astonishingly, all those people, I never heard him say anything negative about. I never heard him call them any names. I never heard him rant on them. I never heard him call them idiots or whatever. Nothing like that. I've heard many the other way. I never heard Walt say anything like that. He was always a gentleman. He was always very kind, very willing to admit if he's wrong. And in fact, one friend of mine was looking in his book and found a mistake, and I called Walt, and Walt was very willing to admit. He said, "Thank you for finding that error." And then he corrected it in the next version, which was a couple versions back. But yeah, he was very willing to do that. And so finally, he actually came with us. He and Peggy actually came with us in 2017 on the Southwest Safari, which, man, once it became known that he was coming along, I had to extend my contract, and we maxed out that bus because we had people coming from all over who wanted to be. It's like traveling with Einstein or something, So he came with us in 2017. And that was a lot of fun having Walt on that trip there too. But one of the things that was really special to me was I was speaking at a large convention in Arizona, in Phoenix actually, where Walt lives, and I had about 600 people in my audience talking about the global flood, and they were all totally fascinated. I told them that I said, tomorrow I will have a special surprise for you if you want to come to my Grand Canyon talk. So then the day came and they went and so forth. So I had talked with the leaders of the convention and told them that Dr. Brown lives in the city. And I said, would it be okay if he came to the convention? And they said, Dr. Brown, come here? Absolutely. So they gave me a free pass to get him in. Well, the next day in the Grand Canyon session, all 600 seats were full, and there were standing room only around the whole room. They did the whole Grand Canyon session, and I was down to the last couple minutes. And when I got down to the last minute, I said to the audience, and my room monitor at the back was holding up the big sign saying 1 minute left and all that, so I knew that. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, I told you yesterday that I was going to have a surprise for you today. So now is the time for the surprise. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my incredible honor to introduce to you Dr. Walter Brown and his wife, Peggy. And they were sitting in the front of the room with my wife, Carrie. He stood up and he got a standing ovation.
Oh, yeah. Praise the Lord.
Astonishing. And then he did something cool. He had brought a whole cartload of his books. He sat in our booth the entire afternoon signing books and answering all the questions that people have. People would come up and just ask, but he spent the entire afternoon and into the evening, and he sold every book that he brought, signed every one, and answered all the questions. Just a humble man wanting to see God's word come alive in people with these issues with the flood that were confusing to them. And he just answered any questions, any scientific, biblical questions that people asked. And that was an amazing experience for us.
Oh, wow. What a blessing. Oh, my. What a blessing. And the lives that he impacted, and even more, another way to do it is hopefully this, that we celebrate the book coming out. Those would be great Christmas gifts. Give it to your pastor, give it to your teacher, give it to your kids. It is just phenomenal. Yeah, that's tremendous blessings. And did you ever go on other trips with Walt, or was it just that one safari one?
No, the only trip I've ever been, and he's done a lot of things. One of the trips that our paths crossed was up in Kalispell, and we were coming off of a speaking engagement and actually coming back out of the national park there, Glacier National Park, and he was arriving anonymously with a group of geologists to go in and study something in the park. And I had seen in that park, I had done some photographs of one of the big mountains there that has layers of sediment, each layer about the height of a human man. And they were literally, they weren't just bent like some layers are. Of course, you can't bend rock. You can only bend mud and clay. They weren't kinked like some of the layers you see. These were literally bent over themselves, parallel to each other, like an S pattern. And I showed him the photographs, and he said, oh, man, show some of these geologists that on this trip. I said, Walt, I'm not going on your trip. We're actually leaving. You're just arriving. It was a kind of a coincidence that we wound up in the same hotel. He's arriving, we're leaving, but I gave him the pictures, and I think he used them because it's another huge evidence that the flood could only explain. There's no way that anything else could explain all those bent layers like that. So. Oh
yeah, and that picture's in your Horrors of the Flood video, right?
Yeah. I think we have pictures of that in there.
Yeah, that was one of the big eye openers with the Horrors of the Flood, is all your footage of bent rock layers. Some of them go up and then they go straight down, and it's just incredible.
Kinked layers and all that. Yeah. And there's so many more than I can put in there. They're all over the world. Yeah. Bent, kinked, severely bent, twisted layers that can only happen while the layers are soft.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes the whole depth of a whole mountain, all bent like that. I mean, you can't bend a mountain.
Yeah,
it's a solid rock. It won't.
Yeah, it couldn't have been millions of years. Yeah, those two videos of yours should be in every house, every church, every library should have the Horrors of the Flood and also the Grand Canyon Puzzle on the Plateau. Just eye-opening evidence that just clearly clearly points to a global flood. Absolutely. Clearly points to this hydroplate theory being accurate. And again, we need to get, it's starting to gain traction. It really is. I'm starting to hear PhDs on Zoom seminars mention the hydroplate. even heard the president of a creation organization that brought it up during a Q&A session one time, and he spoke of it positively. So it's starting to happen. And hopefully, what I'd like to see is that people have the freedom to talk about it without jeopardizing their professional career, because there's that out. I saw it myself, as a Christianist, we were walking, asked me about it, and it was being recorded. And then I asked him, could we put this recording on YouTube? And he said, was this controversial? And they said, this organization doesn't belong with it. And then he said, well, don't then, maybe not. It's like, okay, I don't want to get you in trouble. But that shouldn't even be a consideration. You should just be able to look at the theories and talk about them openly and not have to worry about any negative ramifications for that. That's how science should work. Unfortunately, it's not working that way, but we're doing what we can. And thank God for people like you who go out and you're in the front lines with the people. And your calendar is just packed with the grills, I take it. As far as like homeschool events and other events, or are you still available? If people wanted you to speak, was that still a possibility, or are you just too packed?
Yeah, no, we are. Well, we're full. I have some major surgery coming up on my back later on this year, because we're 2 months out. But other than that, we'll be right back to churches, conventions, all kinds of conventions, homeschool, pastors conferences, teachers conferences, Christian ed conferences, and so forth. And then other beyond churches, it's sometimes military venues, camps, whatever. And then, of course, we do the 3 safaris, one to South Africa, which is the best place you could ever go to see the incredible variety of things that God made. We always do that trip in July. That's a 16-day kind of an ultimate creation and curse safari. Evidence for the curses certainly there as well. And then the one that we just talked about, the Southwest Safari, that's evidence for the global flood and its aftermath. And then we're adding another safari. We're leaving for about a week and a half. It's one we're doing every other year to Alaska, and we do that in connection with one of the cruise lines, either Holland America or Princess. But I speak on the ship in the evenings, and is based on the Stricken Earth session that I do. And so it's Christian travel, but with a purpose. Right. And we do all of our trips at cost, so we can do them for much less than anybody else taking trips to those areas. But they're educational, and they're designed to be fun. Mostly Christians go on them, but they're educational, fun, and go to some of the most phenomenal places in the world.
So if somebody wanted to go on a trip or even schedule you to talk, would that be at missionimperative.org? Would that be the best way? Okay. Absolutely. And they are fun. We had you speak at the Twin Cities Creation Science Association. That was one of the biggest crowds we've had in years. And it was all full of these kids, and you kept their attention the whole way. And what I really enjoyed is when you told us about level 3 artifacts.
Yeah.
Would you bless us with that story today?
Yes. So I use level 3 in the Ranger Mike videos. Every time the script would necessitate talking about evolution, rather than just introducing evolution, I suddenly, when I say something that an evolutionist would take exception to, Ranger Mike appears in a puff of smoke with alarms going off. Ranger, level 3 alert, and then Ranger Mike winds up down in an interrogation room with a little swinging lamp, all dark and it's smoky and everything. And then the whole idea is I pull off the gag, and it's like, why did I wind up in level 3? Oh, it's because I said this. And then we talk about what the evolutionists believe. And then once I tell the truth about it, the handcuffs come off and poof, out I go. We named it level 3 because of an incident that took place in one of the national parks where there's a petroglyph of an apparent dinosaur. Now, is it a dinosaur? We don't know for sure, but it sure is even convincing enough to evolutionists that they have all these explanations as to how in the world an apparent dinosaur got on the rock. One of their theories is, maybe 1,000 years ago, an early Native American saw these many dinosaur footprints in the rocks around southern Utah, and in his mind could imagine, well, maybe a creature. I'll carve in the rock what I think the creature looks like. And sure, he would know from those footprints that it had a long neck. Sure, he would know that it would have a long tail and so forth. So whether it is really a dinosaur or not, we don't know. It certainly looks like it. And when you look at the carving itself, you will, if you don't know exactly where it is, you will never find it because it's not carved in desert glaze. So what you have to do is take a photograph of it and then darken the area that does not have the little stipplings that they did to make a petroglyph. You darken the area that doesn't have stipplings, and when you zoom back, certainly looks like a large sauropod. So anyway, what happened was I called to that national park and I asked when is a good time to photograph the apparent dinosaur petroglyph. Well, the lady didn't want to answer the question. She had the head of the park, the head ranger, call me, head archaeologist, and he called me back that afternoon. I was surprised, and he said, and we got to chatting, and finally he just suddenly blurted out. He says the item in question is best viewed at a certain time. At the time of the year you're going to be there, it'll be in the sun because most of the time it's in the shade. And so he said, well, now I've already exceeded my authority. And I said, you've exceeded your authority? Why? And he said, well, that's a level 3 artifact. I said, what is a level 3 artifact? He says, well, level 1 is anything in the park that you see and we can talk about. A level 2 artifact is something that we won't tell you about unless you already know it's here. And then if you ask about it, well, then we'll explain it. A level 3, these are his words, a level 3 artifact is something we have to pretend doesn't exist.
Wow.
And I was astonished by that.
Oh, yeah.
So when I asked, why do you have to pretend it doesn't exist?
Exactly.
Because it's a threatening thing, to a certain position. And he said, well, yeah, perhaps, but maybe more than that, somebody might want to desecrate it. Yeah, I can imagine somebody might want to,
Yeah.
if they don't want it to be what it apparently is, or it apparently seems to be anyway. So, so they call it a level 3 artifact. So that's how we wound up using that same term in our Ranger Mike videos.
I just love that. Love that. But that goes to show who's got the truth and who has to hide things to keep the truth from getting out.
And if that is in fact, if that is in fact what it is, then that means a Native American roughly 1,000 years ago was literally seeing one in the area, because all other petroglyphs are carvings of things that can be seen.
Yeah.
So if that is what it is, then they were certainly still roaming around here after the flood, roaming around the American Southwest, which is no surprise to any of us.
Right.
Possible to evolutionists, but not a surprise to us.
Well, right. And that's not the only one. There's stegosaurs carved in a temple in Cambodia. There's dinosaurs carved in castles. And it's all right there. But people need to know about it, because you're not going to see that in the textbook.
No.
And that
amazing evidence.
And that brings us to your curriculum. You got a homeschool curriculum too, is that right?
I do, yeah. That came about long ago, about 1998. There were a lot of parents in the homeschool movement who were saying, why isn't there like a direct study on creation versus evolution? And I looked around and there wasn't anything. So what I did back then is I took all of my sessions that I was developing or had developed that I was doing in churches and made them all into a study format. So it has the Bible verses that go along with it. So it basically covers all the sessions that I do when I go into a church, but in a study format. And it's simplified so that anyone from 6th grade and on up can do it. And for younger than that, you'd need maybe parental help. But yeah, it's a curriculum that I came up with then in 2000. And the first one went in production in 2001. I think it's been through like 6 revisions since then.
Wow. And it's so important because the kids need to know what the answers are to their questions. They got good questions, but a lot of them are getting bad answers or they're not equipped to stand up to the evolution. Right. And that shakes their faith. And then some of them walk away. And so as a parent and a teacher in a church, you really need to equip these young people to stand up to this blind chance dogma that permeates our society. Because we've got the winning hand. It's not science versus religion. It's blind chance versus creation.
And we cannot shy away from it. I spoke in North Dakota once at a church where the pastor told me, he said, I've never spoken on Genesis. And I said, why? And he said, oh, I'm afraid of it. It's too controversial. So I said, well, with respect, sir, I hope that the parents in your congregation don't take that same attitude, because if they do, you can guarantee that as soon as they go off to college or whatever, they'll get their faith shattered.
Right.
One time I was speaking at a church, and a lady from a local university a quote unquote Christian university. She teaches a course there at the time anyway, called God and Evolution. And she was kind of arguing with my wife between the sessions. She never came to me, but right when the bell went off for the next session to start, she said something very scary to my wife. She said, look, I get all kinds of kids out of Christian homes, Christian schools, and Christian homeschool kids who don't know what they believe about origins. Then she said, I set them straight. And I think, whoa, that is two scary things. We've got Christians Christian homes, Christian homeschoolers and Christian schools who are not teaching our kids what to believe about origins. I mean, I'm thinking, my word, this is like one of the first things we need to be teaching them. We need to teach them about original creation. We need to teach them about sin. We need to teach them about the flood and about the dispersal and dinosaurs and different languages and how different racial groups came about. That's all very, very reasonable stuff right there in Genesis. And she says, I set them straight. No, she's not. She's just immediately putting them on a path right back to evolution again.
Oh, yeah.
So, this stuff is absolutely important.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Ken Ham wrote a book on that called Already Gone, talking about how they walk away because they doubt the Bible, and they began doubting it when they got taught evolution in the Big Bang in junior high and high school. Yeah, it's really, really, really tragedy, and so important of what you're doing, and what a blessing that is to set, to give kids the answers. They need the answers, and we've got them. But we just need more people doing something with it, I think. Right,
definitely. And the flood, of course, is huge. It's like Walter Brown said years ago. If the Christian church, at the time that Darwin's book came out, and understood the implications of the global flood, the sedimentary layers, and so forth, if we understood the implications, evolution would never have gotten off the ground.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So now we're trying to make up ground again, make up ground against it. So, but now it's so ingrained that it's very hard. It's very difficult for people to think outside the box that they've been put in of billions of years and all that kind of stuff. So.
Oh yeah. But if you can, I like to ask them questions. How did life begin? They can't answer that one. And it's just a blind chance perspective of the past. That's like thinking a building got put together by chance. That's absurd. How much more absurd to think our bodies get put together by that way? And then you see the students, they start thinking about that. It's like, that's right. And, there's on Walt Brown's website, I think it's creationscience.com or .org. There's a link to what's a book called, like the 12 greatest Christian scientists or something like that. And there's a chapter on Walt Brown. And
yes.
And his wife, Peggy, she asked, because she was a theistic evolutionist, I think. And she said, well, what difference does it really make? And then Walt asked her, he said, well, why did Jesus die for our sins? And she said, or why did Jesus die on the cross? And she said, to pay for our sins. And he said, well, if evolution's true, death was here long before man evolved. And if the sin didn't bring death into the world, sin's just fiction. So there's a lot of theological implications by compromising Genesis. And Satan knows if he can compromise Genesis, you compromise anybody who refers to Genesis, including Jesus and the New Testament authors.
And if you think, if people say, well, I believe in let's just take Christians who would say, well, I believe in an earth that's billions of years old. Well, there's another interesting thing that Jesus himself said regarding the age of the earth, even though it wasn't specifically addressing that issue. He said to the Pharisees who were asking him a question, he said, haven't you read that in the beginning, he made them male and female?
Yep.
In the beginning.
Yep.
The same three words are used at the beginning of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and of course, 6 days later, he made man and woman. Now, so if even the liberal Christian view that believes in billions of years will say that, well, mankind, Adam and Eve were made maybe 25,000 years ago. So if that's the case, 25,000 years is like 0.05, 1%, half of 1% of the Earth's history, if it's billions of years old. If the evolutionists, well, they'll say it was billions of years old too, but mankind has only been on the earth for the last 2 million years as an evolving ape-like creature. Either way, Either way, it puts mankind way up closer to where we live now rather than billions of years ago. So
Yeah.
if the earth is billions of years old, then that means that God made Adam and Eve billions of years ago, because he said, haven't you read that in the beginning,
Oh, yeah.
male and
Yeah.
female?
Yeah.
So if the earth was billions of years old, he would have rather said, haven't you read that more recently, just a couple thousand years ago, I made Adam and Eve? No, he said in the beginning.
Yeah.
And that referred to the beginning. Well, nobody would say that mankind is 5 billion years old. So
Right.
that all falls apart.
Right.
The whole thing falls apart. In the beginning is only 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. And there's a lot of things, a lot of ways to corroborate that. But
Yeah, and then they were made on day 6, not millions or billions of years later. Yeah, it's Matthew 19 and also Mark 10:6. At the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female.
Right.
And then in John, I think chapter 3, it says, if I've told you, Jesus saying, if I have told you earthly things and you believe not, how shall you believe if I tell you of heavenly things?
Right.
And and he's our example. He always referred to it as an accurate historical event. He didn't have any trouble with what a day was.
Right.
So, yeah. Wow. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. I want to respect your time, Mike. I do thank you so much for being willing to be interviewed. And do you have any parting words for the people before we let you go?
Oh, trust in the word of God. I mean, ideas come and go all the time. The word of God was not meant only for theologians, only for high trained PhDs. No. The word of God was meant for you and me, common people, and it's meant to be understood.
Yeah.
And it is very clear. Believe it as it's written. It's meant for you and me.
Praise the Lord. Well, thank you again, Mike. I appreciate that. And everybody who's watching, get your Christmas gifts. Going to missionimperative.org and get those videos. You will not be disappointed. He also has some that are made for kids, the Ranger Rick ones. He's also got special ones. Ranger Mike, I'm sorry. Yeah, but it's incredible. So again, thank you, Mike. And I appreciate, and may God bless your efforts.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thanks for having me on, Brian.
Welcome to the Hydroplate Theory Week of Celebration. We're so glad that you've joined us to learn more about Walt Brown and also more about the hydroplate theory. And we're blessed to have a jet fighter pilot here to this name by the name of Bill Wells. And so welcome aboard, Bill. Thanks for joining us for this.
Well, thanks, Brian. I'm really glad to participate in this tribute to a man that I believe that God put into my life over 30 years ago, and has been such a tremendous impact in my life and my ability to witness, and with the ultimate goal of bringing the gospel to people that many of them worked with. Walt has been an example to me of grace under fire, a man of great intelligence, the intelligence that God gave him, a humble man, very meticulous, some have called the Isaac Newton of our age. And he has greatly equipped me to be able to go out into the battlefield of ideas and break through the strongholds that hold many in our society captive. The idea of billions of years, evolution, and how through a misuse of science, people have been convinced that the Bible is not true because of those billions of years of evolution, supposedly.
Yeah. And you had a fighter pilot background in the Air Force, but how did you stumble across the hydroplate theory? How did that come into your life?
Well, to kind of set the stage, I went to the Air Force Academy, entered in 1976, and Walt Brown had left the academy a year prior to that to go off to the Air War College. I graduated in 1980, and that was the year that Walt was separated from active duty, retired to pursue his work in the hydroplate theory. I went on to become a fighter pilot. I flew the F-16 for about 10 years. I flew the T-38 for about 4 years. And I retired after 20 years. About in 1987 is when I became a Christian. And one of the books that I got exposed to was Ken Ham's The Why, Evolution. That really got my attention, and just how the evidence for both creation and evolution, a lot of it's the same evidence. And but it's better interpreted in light of a recent creation and the flood. And so that really kind of got my attention. At the time, it was the canopy theory. Back in 1989, the end of 89, I separated from active duty and moved up to Duluth, Minnesota, where I joined the Air National Guard to continue to fly the F-16. And I also got hired by Northwest Airlines to fly as a commercial airline pilot. And I did those simultaneously until I retired from the Air Force about 10 years later. So, excuse me, I decided early on in my airline career that I really wanted to be able to be a witness, to share this good news of salvation in Jesus Christ that I had learned and had become very important to me. And for some reason, I wanted to share it with people. And I began to find that the creation evolution issue was a very powerful tool to bringing the gospel to people. But it's also a major stumbling block because a lot of people are convinced that the Bible is not true because of supposedly what science has said about billions of years in evolution. And so that was a big stumbling block that I had to get people past, to show them that the Bible is actually true in its history. And so unfortunately early on it was the canopy theory, and I would use that with people and just not with much success. Mm. Then in around 1992, I was off on a trip, but my wife heard about a seminar that Walt was going to be giving up in the Duluth area, one of the churches up there. She went and heard Walt's explanation of the hydroplate theory, which she'd never heard before. And as she explains it, just the light bulbs just started going off, and it just made so much sense to her. She was so excited about it. She did something that she doesn't normally do, and that's to buy the book of a seminar that she's at. She bought Walt's book, and at the time, I believe it was the 5th edition. Mm. And so she brought it home, and she knew I had a growing interest in the creation evolution issue. Once I started reading Walt's book, The Hydroplate Theory, for me, just so many dots got connected. And I really got excited about it. And I wanted to know more, ask some questions. So I started calling Walt and talking about the hydroplate theory, discussing some of the commonality that we had. He's a West Point graduate. I was an Air Force Academy graduate, so there's a little inter-service rivalry that started there jokingly, particularly around Army Air Force football games.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
But he eventually cross-commissioned into the Air Force because the Air Force wanted him to stay on as a tenured professor.
Sure.
So we started talking, and I started supporting his ministry. And because I just saw the importance of it and how it would help me breach those strongholds to ultimately give someone the gospel. And I started bearing a lot of fruit as I learned more and more about the hydroplate theory.
And you would use the hydroplate as you witness to people? Is that right?
Well, I started to.
Yeah.
And that continued for the next about 30 years.
Because
And the
we've been
hydroplate.
Yeah, we've been told that nobody cares about the flood model. And I found that, if you can explain 25 major features on Earth and in the solar system, plus to have it make accurate predictions, and now we got NASA discoveries validating it, I think
Right.
that's a pretty robust theory. And to say nobody cares about it, I think that's rather biased to
Well, I would completely disagree with the idea that nobody cares.
oh, me too.
And it
Yeah.
was the hydroplate theory was my most powerful tool to
Yeah.
ultimately get to the gospel. One is because of the amount of evidence that there is to support it
Yep.
and how it uh, really kind of shakes people up a little bit because everybody seems to think that millions of billions of years is settled science, that evolution is settled science. Then you start talking about the evidence that there's a different way of interpreting that evidence and
Exactly.
that the evidence does not support the billions of years. And this is why. It's one
Exactly.
thing to say it, but it's another to be able to produce evidence to show it.
Yeah.
And so with that, I was able to do it. And it's similar to when I was trained as a fighter pilot, the F-16, I was given training, I was given weapons that were both defensive and offensive in nature. And with the defensive weapons, I could help ensure my survival so that I could use the offensive weapons to complete the mission that I was given. And with the hydroplate theory, I was given very powerful weapons that I came to trust
Mhm.
because I saw how successful they were in getting people's attention, particularly for flying over the Grand Canyon.
Mm.
And I can point out the funnel, or
Yeah.
I can tell somebody that was we're flying into San Diego, I could say, oh, by the way, off to the right, it doesn't look like it right now because of the angle, but tomorrow morning when we take off with a real low sun angle, you're going to see something that looks like a great big funnel, and that's the breach point of one of the first two lakes that breached to rapidly form the Grand Canyon. But as we take off out of San Diego, just after the airport opens up, you're going to be looking at the debris field. And that's where 2,800 cubic miles of rock, sediment, sand was deposited by these massive sheets of water, which explains where that material went, that the conventional explanation of the Colorado River simply can't explain it. The Gulf of California does not have 2,800 cubic miles of sediment rock, whereas it's spread out over that part of Southern California and Western Arizona. And it's great to be able to pop up at high altitude and be able to see that. And that's one of the perspectives that I have that a lot of people don't, is a lot of my witnessing was done at 35,000 feet.
Wow.
And there are times where as you're sitting in a cockpit of an airliner, things are quiet, not dealing with bad weather or air traffic control delays, things like that. You can talk about various things. Below 10,000 feet, can't talk about anything but flying the airplane. But above that, you can talk about pretty much anything as long as you keep the radio transmissions. You can listen to radio transmissions and properly respond. Anyway, from my perspective, sitting at 35,000 feet, I saw evidences of flood all over the country, not just the Grand Canyon,
Really?
particularly the sink valleys, which Walt describes. And with low sun angles, you see these sink valleys all over the country
Really?
where uh, because when a valley opens up, now the entrained water in the freshly laid down sediments now has a place to go. It starts running into that newly opened valley or canyon, and it runs in and it starts eroding the material. The valley, the material on top starts to sink
Really?
because it's the material underneath that's being eroded. And it's most dramatic in the Grand Canyon, of course.
Sure.
But I could see these sink valleys all over the country and point them out.
Really?
And so to the point where the first officer I flew with, a couple of years before I retired, at age 65 is mandatory retirement for airline pilots. But I spent a good portion of the trip sharing with him about the geology that the flood would have formed. And we got a chance to see the Grand Canyon and the funnel. And at the end of the trip, this geology major looked at me and said, you just uprooted everything I ever learned about geology.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And he became very open to understanding that the Bible's history is true, starting on page 1.
Praise the
And
Lord.
so it's a very important thing, I think, to be able to take this book, the Bible, that you're trying to teach people about Jesus Christ and their need for him, with a literal crucifixion, literal death, literal 3 days in the tomb, literal resurrection. Uh, but if you don't believe what's on page one of these literal days of creation, for
Right.
example, you really don't have a leg to stand on, because somebody can pull the rug out from under you. If
Right.
you don't believe what's on page one, why should I believe you about this 3 days in the tomb?
Right.
So anyway, Walt equipped me with weapons, so to speak, that I felt confident going in to the battle, and to breach those strongholds, and to get people to the point where they'd be open to the gospel. And so, to get back to your original question, um, I started supporting him, and then got a letter from him, to the supporters, asking for people who would be willing to proofread his work with the upcoming, and I think it was the 6th edition, that he was looking for proofreaders. And so I called him up, and we chatted about our common backgrounds. I studied engineering mechanics at the academy, a little bit of a common background there as well, although Walt is way beyond me. Beyond me.
So when he was looking for proofreaders, he just said basically, does anybody want to help me proofread this? Or you banged on
Really?
his.
Yes.
So he would
He
just let
wasn't.
he wasn't trying to hide it from anybody. It's like, hey, you guys want to take a look, find the errors in it? Was that more like it, how it was?
Absolutely. Not only that, I was surprised that he would actually, somebody of his stature. I mean, as people, we kind of tend to look up at people that are really smart,
Yeah.
And why would he want to listen to me? But he really wanted to hear what I had to say, and incorporated some of things that I had into the book.
And so he wasn't concerned about somebody taking it and copywriting it before him. He was just letting people
No,
look at it. Yeah.
no. And the Walt was not in this to make money.
Right.
He was in it to serve the Lord. And it was just a tremendous example to me. As I mentioned, grace under fire.
Oh, yeah.
The amount of vitriol that he received, not only from people and that are, non-believers, but also believers.
Yeah, that's a can nobody wants to open, but I think it needs to be opened. I think there needs to be some discussion of there. I mean, this is the theory that we should have been promoting for the last 50 years.
Absolutely.
And if we would have been doing that, we'd have so much scientific clout, because it seems like every few years there's another astounding prediction that gets validated. And
Right.
yet, it's been kicked to the curb, to the creationists' detriment. And
Right.
so, and hopefully, we get more of this into more people find out about it and be impacted like you and like me. The thing that changed me was like when I listened to Walt Brown Week on Real Science Radio, rsr.org, that just colored in all the details, and I've never seen the world the same again. And I think if we can get more people exposed to this, I think that's going to be incredibly powerful weapon, like you say. And so, yeah, praise the Lord with what you've been able to do, and, using the earth and the flood to point them to the Bible. And that just opens up the door to salvation. And when people say that it doesn't matter, I really question, what are they really trying to do here? But
Well, those people that say it doesn't matter haven't walked in my shoes. Uh,
they have what?
Have not walked in my shoes and
Yeah.
seen the power of the hydroplate theory in getting people's attention, because it makes so much sense.
Well, it does.
Not only because it's an understandable, once the fountain started breaching open, everything just follows normal, understandable cause and effect relationships using known physical
Yeah.
laws, chemical processes.
Yeah, it's all logical, and engineers, mechanics, and engineers love this because it deals with forces and mechanisms and
Yes.
energy budgets, and it's all very logical, and yeah, and it's all right there. It's just it's we just need to get this into the mainstream as fast as we can, from my perspective.
You raise an interesting point about this should have been being given to believers for the last 50 years.
Oh yeah.
That is early on when I started studying the creation evolution issue, and like I said, it started with Ken Ham's book.
Yeah.
I began to see how the evolutionary side was able to just completely stiff arm and marginalize and put down the creation side.
Yep.
Which completely stifled the debate,
Yep.
kept the information out. people are given one side of the issue. And that was started to get really frustrating to me. But as I started talking to Walt and learning more about the hydroplate theory, learning more about his background, I began to see that the creation of the big three, what became the big three creationist organizations, were doing the same thing to Walt.
Yes.
Keeping this information away. And it really, for 30 years, has really bothered me and been an item of prayer, is because I can see these defensive and offensive weapons that work being kept from the people on the battlefield.
Yeah.
These creationist organizations, they do a lot of good work, but when it comes to the promoting which model of the flood, they are keeping a very powerful tool out of the hands of people like me who are out there trying to bring the gospel. I mean, Jesus didn't send us out to make people creationists. He said, go out into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. But you got to understand the battlefield that you're going out to in the particular culture. And this particular culture we live in has been convinced that science has disproved the Bible, the very Bible you're trying to witness to them from.
Right.
So being able to cut through those barriers, the hydroplate theory to me is the most powerful, yet that's being withheld. And the big, call them the big three, without mentioning them by name, I guess, but the big three creationist organizations have a long history of promoting flood models that have no basis in the Bible.
Yes. Well, it's a secular model they just sped up. They took plate tectonics and they sped it up. It's
not just that, it's the canopy theory. And the canopy theory was held as this sacred cow, so to speak.
Yeah.
And anybody that questioned that was seen as questioning the entire creation movement. It was a theory that had really no basis in the Bible.
Right.
And catastrophic plate tectonics, particularly with your asking for biblical references that support the CPT, there are none.
Right.
It's, to me, it's time for these groups to, as they did with the canopy theory, to just quietly walk back away from it. About mid 90s, on a layover in Phoenix, and let him know I was going to be there. And so he came out to the airport, picked me up at a layover there in Phoenix. And so they took me out to dinner and brought me back to their home for a while, and brought me in the backyard. And that's where the Center for Scientific Creation is located.
Really?
It's kind of Walt said that people come there visiting, they expect to see big office buildings, and no, it's just this brick building that's cozy and back in the corner of the yard there. It's two rooms. It's just he and Peggy. And so we got a chance to, that's where I first really got a chance to meet him and sit down on, and have a nice one-to-one conversation. And we covered a lot of ground. I asked him how he first started to pursue the hydroplate theory. And he had just been assigned to the Air Force Academy. He was driving from the east, and his way to try to keep himself awake, he was listening to a radio show that talked about the various sightings of Noah's Ark. And what struck him was the consistency between the reports of people that didn't know each other.
No.
And I was trained as an aircraft accident investigator. One of the things I had to learn was how to interview witnesses, properly handle witness testimony. And one of the things was to make sure they can't talk. Well, these people are separated by geographically as well as by much time. And this is, of course, way before the internet. People saw these reported these sightings of the Ark, and they're saying the same thing, which lends great credibility to the fact that there's probably something there that looks like this Ark, because people that don't know each other are saying the same thing. And so as he's driving towards the Rampart Mountain Range, at the base of which is the Air Force Academy, he's thinking, okay, this has some credibility. What would it take to float? Where would you get the water to float a boat to the top of those mountains, which is roughly the height of the mountains of Ararat? And then where would the water go? And his starting point was the Bible, the fountains of the great deep. And he started his search for the fountains of the great deep. And another thing we talked about, what I think is really a good way of answering the charge that I've heard from the geologists at some of the other creation organizations that Walt's not a geologist, he's not a professional geologist.
Right.
And I find that very irritating.
Yep.
Because it really negates, one, just the massive capability that God gave Walt to be able to pursue and understand other scientific disciplines.
Right.
And he recognized he had a deficiency in geology. So when he left, he separated from being ICR Midwest, and he went back to Phoenix, and he decided that he wanted to study geology at ASU under Dr. Robert Dietz.
Oh, yeah.
And the time that Walt spent with Robert Dietz and what they did together, I think is a huge wake-up call to these geologists that are trying to marginalize Walt's knowledge of geology.
Now, for those who don't know who Bob Dietz is, do you want to fill in, his
Robert Dietz,
credentials?
he's now passed away, but he was one of the co-authors of the plate tectonics theory.
Right. He coined the term seafloor spreading, and Walt Brown learned from him. And,
oh, yes.
And so for them to say that he doesn't have any geology background, I mean, he learned from the guy who came up with the theory.
Well, it's not just Walt sat in a classroom under this guy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Right.
They knew each other before Walt showed up at ASU.
Yeah.
But then Walt shows up as a student, and he wants to learn geology under Dr. Robert Dietz.
Yeah.
And so they developed this working relationship, and it just wasn't in the classroom because Dietz knew that Walt was working on his a competing theory.
Yep.
The hydroplate theory.
Yep.
And so they set up where every Wednesday afternoon they would get together for several hours and discuss their theories.
Yep.
And there would be lectures given by visiting geologists, and Dietz would invite Walt to come to that. And they even, and I think this is an important point, not just the relationship that Walt had, this learning relationship that Walt had with one of the co-founders of plate tectonics, but was the joint research project that they entered into.
Oh,
that was discussing, they had developed in their discussions, they were talking about the mid-oceanic ridges and the fracture zones.
Yes.
And each of them had a prediction about what those fracture zones actually looked like.
Yes.
And Walt's view was that these are tension cracks.
Yep.
And they'd be more V-shaped. And Dietz's view was that they're shear zones formed by shear fractures.
Mm-hmm.
So very different view of what these fracture zones would look like. And so some research was done on these fracture zones, and it came to find out that they're V-shaped and U-shaped. So the hydroplate theory won. A prediction of hydroplate theory won over a prediction of plate tectonics. So
over and over and over again. Yeah, Fred McNabb, he's compiled them. There's 20 accurate predictions out of 58. Over and over, and it just is bizarre how a theory that's making all these accurate predictions, they're not getting the time of day. And
so these guys that want to pursue the accelerated miracle boosting version of the plate tectonics theory ought to go take a look at those fracture zones.
And they should also look at the relationship that Walt had with Bob. They've got competing theories, and yet they're able to discuss their ideas civilly. You
And they
know,
became good friends.
yeah,
Over.
exactly. Exactly.
Yes.
They didn't hide each theory from each other and say, no, you can't look at it. And like they're on different teams. And that's basically what we are. I mean, the creationists, we're all on the same team. We all want the truth to get out there. We should be sharing our ideas with everybody. And
Yes.
and Walt Brown, he welcomed if he made an error, he wanted to know that so he could correct it. And I mean, the hydroplate theory should be open door for everybody, so we can get everybody on page. And if there are errors, and there may be, we can fix them. But I think the framework for it is pretty solid because it
Yes.
makes accurate predictions in a multitude of fields. And
Yes. In various parts of the Earth and the solar system.
exactly, exactly. Yeah,
So that's that. Not only that, but they found undisturbed sediments in the down inside these fracture zones, and that is not what you would expect if it was a shear surface, but is consistent with the V-shaped structure.
yeah.
It also explains the magnetic anomalies
Oh,
that were interpreted as magnetic field reversals, but really it's just increasing and decreasing strengths of magnetic energy as one passes over these fracture zones.
sure.
So, for those that wanted to try to marginalize Walt's ability as a geologist, they need to take a look at his relationship with Robert Dietz and their joint research project, where the hydroplate theory came on top.
Right.
Um, so, yeah, so we got to know each other and through there, and I'd call him on the phone with various aspects of the proofreading. But then came time, I decided that I wanted to have Walt up to Duluth to do a seminar and a debate,
Ooh.
if I could arrange that. Walt had a standing offer for a debate, verbal debate, with all the framework set up and the rules. And I decided that I would really like to sponsor a debate. So um, I'd been following these debates for several years, and I knew that I did not need to try to play any tricks to make my side look better.
Right.
Simply provide a way in which a civil discussion of the evidence can be obtained on a stage in a civil manner, and just let the audience hear things that they never heard before.
Yeah.
And I knew I didn't need to do any tricks to try to make Walt look good. So I sought I called up the dean of UMD, University of Minnesota Duluth, explained the debate, the purpose of the debate, the topic, and asked them to give me their best PhD.
Wow.
And they handed me off to the dean of what I guess is the dean of the faculty, explained the whole thing, and he recommended a particular professor who was a professor of the philosophy of science.
Sure.
And I was a little disappointed. Well, philosophy of science, why not a geologist or
Yeah.
biologist or whatever? But I figured, okay, somebody in the philosophy of science is going to be able to accumulate across a broad range of scientific disciplines, not just a
Right.
particular. Okay.
Yeah.
And one of the debate officers that offers is that the evolutionist is free to put together a panel if he wants
Yeah.
from across a broad range of topics. So anyway, we got together with this evolutionist, and I sought a moderator from Saint Scholastica.
Sure.
Asked again, give me your best PhD to act as a moderator. Went to a neutral building, which in this case was Marshall School. It's a secular private school, 850-seat auditorium,
Yeah.
and widely advertised it, and the place was packed
Oh, yeah.
when it came time for the debate. And the debate structure, each side got to speak uninterrupted for 40 minutes. And to me, that was the most important part of the whole
Sure.
night, is
Sure.
because by my estimation, by walking through the crowds and listening to conversations, I think I probably had a roughly 50-50 mix
Wow.
of believers and unbelievers.
Yep.
Like Walt said, if we could have packed the place with unbelievers, that'd have been better, because in that first 40 minutes, they're going to hear things they'd never heard before.
Right.
And then the evolutionist presented his side, and there was a break. And that's where I walked through the crowd listening to what people are saying.
Oh, yeah.
And then the debate started. The debate was an hour long. contestant had 30 minutes of total speaking time. To keep it civil, there was no interrupting. Each individual could speak for 2 minutes, and if he went beyond 2 minutes, he could interrupt or hand off his 2 minute speaking time to the opponent with a question.
Sure.
The question had to be answered within 5 seconds, or the other guy could interrupt. And so all of these rules had time penalties. So if you violated one of the rules, like interrupting, then 1 or 2 minutes would be deducted from your speaking time and given to the other.
Oh, wow. That's a good idea.
I had no way to display that like a scoreboard in the theater. Unfortunately, all the rules were explained by the moderator, so everybody knew what was coming. But I had no way of displaying the number of times that the evolutionist was violating what we call the no religion rule. Walt called it the no religion rule. And what that is you could not quote from any religious source. You could not attack a religious position. You stick to the debate topic, which was, does the scientific evidence favor creation or evolution? And so 25 minutes into the debate, the evolutionist stood up and said, due to the vicissitudes of this debate, I am now out of time.
He's now out of what? He's what?
I am now out of time. He
Oh.
was out of speaking time because he had violated the no religion rule so many times that each time he violated, time was taken from him and given to Walt.
Yeah.
So by the time, after 25 minutes of what should have been an hour debate, the evolutionist was out of speaking time because he violated the no religion rule so many times. And so Walt was handed about 30 minutes of uninterrupted speaking time at what should have been a debate.
Yeah.
And so
wow.
he had to kind of scramble to reorient his thinking and just give another lecture on.
Wow.
So
do you think that guy did it on purpose because he didn't have an hour to say? I mean, it's a way for him to save face and not have to deal with it. I don't know.
Well, one of the things that he did was he put up this list of all these genetically transmitted diseases. And they're really horrible diseases. And he says, what kind of a loving God would allow this? Well, that's a religious attack. Hello. So anyway, we got the opportunity to host Walt at our home for 3 days during that time because we had a seminar was also given at the Marshall School because of a big auditorium, and that was for all the local churches. Anybody wanted to come. And then the debate was held that night, Saturday night, and then Sunday at our church, Walt also spoke. So we got a chance to host Walt at our home and interact with him there, learn more about he and his ministry. Interesting story about one of the things he says, well, people when they meet Peggy, they really want to talk to her because she's the more interesting of the two of us. And he said that Peggy would catch him just kind of staring off into space, and she knew that he had colliding galaxies going on in his head as he's thinking through all these different aspects of what not only what would cause the flood, but the impact, the subsequent things that the flood would cause, and just the sheer brilliance that God gave him in being able to connect all these things.
And it was much more violent than he had first anticipated.
Yeah. So it was fun hosting him and getting to know him that way.
What year was that? Do you remember what year that was?
96.
Okay.
September of 96.
How can we get the hydroplate into the culture to impact it more than what it is right now?
Well, in my view, it starts with the kids, and the information needs to get out. And given the resources and the outreach that the big three creation organizations have, I think this is where it starts. And so, to me, the way to get it to influence our culture and get it on the mainstream is to have the big creation organizations start to talk about the hydroplate theory. And that's going to get into the minds of the kids, and the kids are going to be able to talk to their friends. And there are two things that need to happen when you equip kids to go off to school. And it's not just kids, it's everybody. But first, they need to protect their faith.
Right.
And there's a reason, all that armor that we're given in Ephesians 6, all of it's defensive. There's only one offensive weapon. Well, their faith needs to be protected. And they're going away from home. They're going to a different peer group. They've got these professors that have their grades hanging over their heads. There's a lot of pressure to accept the evolutionary view and believe that the Bible's been discredited. There's a lot of pressure to do that. But with the hydroplate theory, kids have the ability to incorporate maybe their parents' young earth creation views and make it their own, because they have a way to defend it. They have the evidence to be able to show people that what, like I said, it's the same evidence, but the interpretation, the old age interpretation doesn't make sense, because this is why, this isn't this.
Right.
And then they have the ability to show, okay, not only is yours wrong, but here's how it happened. A better way of explaining how it happened that lines up with the Bible.
Exactly.
And so the first thing that has to happen is the kids have to be able to protect their own faith from getting shipwrecked.
Right.
And once they have that, then they have the ability to, with respectful questions, start asking questions about the evidence that's used to support billions of years of evolution.
Yeah.
And I can tell you from my own experience, and I think Barna has done some research, and some of the big three have also done polling data to try to figure out why so many kids are leaving their faith when they leave home. And it's primarily that the science, I call it a misuse of science, has rendered the Bible irrelevant for today. It's just proven it. And of the issues there, it's the age of the earth and evolution. So, but of those two issues, the age of the earth and evolution, it's the age of the earth that's the more volatile. It's the one that people think is the most settled. And I could tell you, because I've seen the look many times, you can have a debate with somebody or discussion about problems with the theory of evolution and the fossil record and all that. But then you tell them you think the earth is about 6,000 years old, and the expression on their faces changes quite dramatically, because now they think you're an idiot.
Sure.
And until they start hearing the evidence.
Yeah.
And so to me, just really being able to defend a young earth from the evidence. And that's what Walt Brown's theory does, the hydroplate theory, does so well. And it gives, I know it gives me confidence.
Oh, yeah.
It will give kids confidence that actually, well, I guess God was right all along.
Right. Right.
And that the Bible is true from page one, and that it's supported by the evidence.
Right. And I was in a debate with a science teacher, and during the Q&A session, he had 25 minutes to grill me, and I had 25 minutes to grill him. And a lot of the questions I could answer with the hydroplate theory. You know, it's all encompassing, and it was really, you're right, it gives you confidence. And we do need to equip the next generation. And when I'm at St. Cloud State and I meet an atheist, it's like, okay, we'll play in your ballpark. You know, without God, how did life begin? Without God, where did matter come from? And when I talk to really little kids, it's like, there's people that don't believe what God says. You know, they're not on God's side. And you want to be able to figure out who's on what team. And so you just ask them, where did people come from? If they point you to Adam and Eve, they're on God's side. And if they don't, then they're not on God's side. So at least you know who you can believe and who you can trust. And with your experience and how it's been very effective on people, linking the world to the Bible, and that opens them up to Jesus Christ. And that's what Mike Snavely's done, with his big, do you know Mike at all? Mike Snavely?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and that's what we need. And, you guys have blazed the trail for us to follow, and now we need to hand it off to the next generation. So, like, do you give creation talks at all? If somebody called in your neighborhood, would you go talk to them at a church or a school or anything like that?
Done in my church. In fact, I just finished up a 16-session course at our church. And in fact, I called, before I started it, I called Peggy.
Yeah.
And to talk to her. I knew Walt was heading downhill.
Yeah.
And so I called her and she said, well, Walt's sleeping right now. I can't talk. I just wanted to let him know that, hey, I'm using your stuff again, Walt.
Praise
You
the
know,
Lord.
you're going to be the star here,
Praise the Lord.
because hydroplate theory is a centerpiece of
Yeah.
it. And I saw Walt 7 years ago, 2018. We were just about to start a trip with Mike Snavely, and we had great lunch with him, good talks, talk about the old, the debate, good old days, and all that. And when we went to say goodbye, we both had tears in our eyes, and I suspect we both knew that this would be the last time this side of heaven that we'd see each other.
Mm.
And it was kind of an emotional deal. And then a few years later, called Peggy and told her that I was doing this seminar. But what a great man for the Lord to put in my life. What an
Right.
influence,
Yeah.
great inspiration.
And from that little office, that little building, how he's reached the world, and
Oh,
now
yeah.
he's in heaven, and yet his work is going to continue on. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do whatever I can to get to this in front of as many people as possible, so they're equipped to stand up to these ungodly lies. And
Yeah.
thank God that Walt did all that research, and just in a tremendous gift to the body of Christ, and that's not being appreciated the way it should be.
I agree.
And
Yeah,
so hopefully
I agree.
that's going to change, and it might be from the grassroots up. But yeah, we just have a couple of minutes left. Do you have any parting ideas or thoughts for the people before we go?
Um, well, it's just that you need to know the culture that you're witnessing. You need to know the battlefield. The weapons are going to be thrown at you, and one of the biggest issues is the creation evolution issue,
Right.
and being able to address that in an intelligent way, with evidence, uh, using the hydroplate theory, for example, is just a tremendous way to show people that the things that have been used to convince them that the Bible's wrong through billions of years of evolution don't really do that. Because if you interpret these evidence within the full range of known physical, chemical laws and processes, the hydroplate theory makes, and a young Earth makes a lot more sense.
Oh,
And hence,
absolutely.
the
Absolutely.
Bible's correct in its history.
Absolutely. And I look at the world, this is, the world's a mess because there's a battle between God's truth and Satan's lies. And ground zero for that battle is creation versus evolution. And the battleground is our classrooms and the courtrooms, and the
Yeah,
textbooks are the ammo. But we've got the atomic bomb basically with the hydroplate, and that could sway the victory in our way, but we're not equipping our soldiers with the best weapon available.
exactly. And to see them not equipped has just been a frustration for me for 30 years.
Well, we do appreciate you getting it off your chest today, and hopefully that God will use these recordings and these interviews to reach as many people as possible. And everybody out there, you can get the hydroplate theory. If it's not available for Christmas, you can get it at hpt.rsr.org. You can get a PDF of it, and so you can start getting equipped. So thank you so much, Bill. I appreciate it, and may God bless your efforts.
Thank you too, Brian. You too. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, wasn't that fun? I hope that you enjoyed our week of celebration. And we do have some guests coming in here. This is going to be a lot of fun. The speakers that you just heard, you'll be able to ask questions. You can chat those on YouTube or on Facebook.